Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Hammer and Nail Show. I'm Jack Hammer. Here's my host, Jesse Naylor. Hey Jesse, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, man. We got a week before the draft. Unfortunately, this is going to be our last show before the draft because we always go on Thursday and the draft's on Thursday. So I think we've got some things to hammer, no pun intended, actually, maybe pun intended, hammer some things out tonight and get this draft ready to roll, get everybody set up and excited about what we've got to see over the next week. So I'm ready for it, man.
Yeah, exactly. A week from right now, at this point, we're going to be sitting here. We're already going to know who that pick was, at least the first pick in the for the 49ers in the at number 3 in the draft. So, really looking forward to it. I know one of the things that you and I had talked about wanting to do was just kind of go through and the first time that we got together, we had talked about our rankings for the quarterbacks, and we kind of wanted to go back and redo that again.
Yeah, that was actually, and I see him in the chat, Josh Mangold. He's the one that kind of hit us up on that. He had a great idea because we talked about it. It was probably the first show we ever did together before we actually did Hammer and Nails. I think it was on my channel, and we went through the quarterbacks, and that was kind of where the debate got started. And we figured, hey, this would be a cool thing. Like let's do a show together. But he kind of wants us to rehash that because A, it's been a while, and B, we really only have 4 options at this point. Like we're not going to get, I don't know, a Kellen Mond or a Kyle Trask or those types of players. So we really just need to kind of rehash the 4, kind of say what we like and don't like about them, and then rank them, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's definitely been narrowed down from the first time we did this.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Really
yeah.
So who do you have at 4 then?
So 4 for me is going to be Mac Jones.
Okay.
So, again, I think that there are things that Mac does very well. We can talk all day about the talent around him, but let's just be honest for a second. Every single one of these quarterbacks has talent around him. Let's look at Zach Wilson. I've been going pretty deep looking into this draft because for my channel, we're doing kind of a unique thing where we're drafting 11 offensive players, and then tonight we're actually drafting 11 defensive players strictly from this draft. And the way that we're doing it is we're getting 2 picks in rounds 4 through 7. So I'm learning a lot about some of these later picks that I had no idea about. But what it's also done is it's made me realize how much talent a team like BYU actually has, right? Mm-hmm. And they have as many as 5 guys that are probably going to get drafted just from the offensive side that are not named Zach Wilson. So he had some NFL talent around him. And he wasn't necessarily playing the most talented teams this year because of the COVID season and what have you. So I look at him and he's got a lot of talent. I look at the other 3 and we know that Ohio State's got a ton of talent. We also know that Lance comes from basically the Alabama of Division II football. So he's got a lot of talent around him, right? And so I can't knock Mac Jones for the talent thing because if I do that, then I got to knock everybody else.
Yep.
But I don't see anything personally in watching him that he just does elite. He's kind of the jack of all trades, but the master of none. He does a lot of things really well. He anticipates well. He throws people open pretty well. He's got a good enough arm to make it operate, throws a good deep ball. He is pretty savvy in the pocket, pretty good in the pocket. He's athletic enough. He played tennis. But he just doesn't do anything great. He's got good size, but not elite size. And I just feel like at the next level for pick 3, I've got to see something that's just like, wow, oh my gosh, this is just reaching out from the screen as I watch film. And this guy can be elite at the next level. And I just don't see that from him. I think he can be better than Jimmy. And I have Jimmy as probably the 20th best quarterback, 21st best quarterback in the league when he's healthy. So I'm not knocking him. If he's the 15th best quarterback, I think we can win with that. But at pick 3, I just feel like we've pushed everything all in, and it would be crazy to not take a risk at this point because we've already done everything we can to make this a risky proposition. So let's just finish the deal and go with somebody that's a little bit more risky. So for me, I have Mac Jones at 4. Who do you have at 4?
Yeah, I like what you said there about, the talent at all these schools and how you can't really use that as a knock against any of these guys. And another one that you hear a lot of is and it gets brought up a lot as Mac Jones didn't beat out Tua and Jalen Hurts at Alabama. That's when you hear from him. But if you go down the list, he didn't beat those guys out. You have the Jake Fromm, Justin Fields deal at
Yep.
Georgia.
Yep.
You have Trey Lance, who didn't even get an offer from a Power 5 school to play quarterback.
Yep.
So all three of those guys kind of fit into that one, and then to go
Zach Wilson wanted to go to Utah, and he got offered way too late. Like they kind of just spurned him a little bit. And it's not like Utah's a good college football team, but it's not amazing.
No, they're a good team in the Pac-12, but they're not top level. But totally,
right.
Yeah. Going back to like what you said though, the talent level at BYU, and that's part of the reason why I actually have Wilson as my 4th rated quarterback on my list.
Okay.
He had a really good 2020 season, but if you go back and you watch him in 2019, he wasn't anywhere near the quarterback that he was in 2020. And a lot of that, I think, comes from the fact that in 2020, because their schedule got blown up with the pandemic, they really ended up playing a bunch of weaker competition.
Mm-hmm.
And they really are able to take advantage of that. Even their bowl game, when they went to play UCF, UCF had a number of guys that were injured in their secondary, and
yep.
They were able to take care of it. And he just wasn't really ever challenged in the pocket very much. The only time he really was in 2020 was the Coastal Carolina game.
Yeah.
Which was actually better than it looked on TV. When you watch the film, he played better than I originally thought. But when you go back and watch him in 2019, he's dealing with a lot more pressure around him, and he really struggles with his mechanics and seeing the field and things like that. So for me, that's why I've never really been high on him, and I keep him at 4. That's actually a big change from where we originally started on this podcast.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Yeah.
All right. So number 3 for me is Zach Wilson. Basically all the things that you mentioned. I look at Zach, and the only reason that I put him above Mac Jones is he has that little something that gets me excited. He can make the wow plays, the plays that are going to get you off your couch and cheer like crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And so there is that potential that can translate to the next level. And if he cleans up some of those fundamental things, that he could become something pretty good. But I look at him, and Fog City Niner is exactly right. He says, I might be wrong, but Wilson has big bust potential. I agree with you. I think he has the biggest propensity to bust in this draft. And a lot of that is going to go based off of possibly where he goes. If he goes to San Francisco, I feel a lot better about it than I do if he went to the Jets. But I just think that he feels he's a little bit more athletic than what he actually is. He's certainly not on the athletic level of Lance or Fields. He's not as big as those guys. His arm, regardless of what you want to say, I know he dazzles a lot and makes these crazy throws. His arm is frankly not as strong as theirs either. And he plays like he is on that athletic level, and he's just quite frankly not. And his stature being small, I worry that he's going to get injured at the next level. And I also worry that he feels himself a little bit too much. It personally turned me off to watch his pro day and just have a cheering section there. And every time he made a good throw, it was like there was a whole crowd there rooting for him.
Yeah.
Okay, great. But I don't want my quarterback to need that. He shouldn't have to need all of these guys cheering for him and making him feel like he's the best thing since sliced bread. Like, just go out there, do your work, and get through it. I feel like he just gives me that vibe that he wants to be too cool. And that means just as much to him as anything else. And the other thing too is I don't think he's faced a lot of adversity throughout his life. And I could be wrong on that. I haven't dug deep into his childhood or anything like that. But I do know that he came from a family that has money. His uncle is extremely rich. He was basically handed the keys at BYU right away. He hasn't faced a lot of adversity. And I wonder that if he is put in a situation much like Andrew Luck, where things aren't going the best for him, he's getting beat up a little bit, At what point does he say, you know what? I've got plenty of money. I don't need this. And that worries me about him as well. So for me, I've got him at number 3.
Yeah, I hear that. For me, number 3, I've got Justin Fields at number 3. I I he was a guy that I had at number 2 the first time we did this. I've actually bumped him down slightly. Part of it too was really going through doing all the film breakdowns that I've been doing, really with Lance and Fields and Jones, really forced me to really take a deeper look at everybody. And that was one of the things I mentioned when we had Coach McAvoy on a few weeks ago, was just what I better appreciation I got for his game. And the same thing a little bit with Fields was kind of went the other way, because the more I watched him, the more I saw a guy who just there's a lot of discussion about how he holds the ball, and it's true, he does hold the ball even when he's not reading guys that are having to run option routes. There's times when he holds the ball. There's times when he takes off running that he doesn't need to run. He's more inconsistent. So for me, when I rank these guys outside of Wilson, those other 3, I really rank them based off of their ability to win from the pocket, and then if they need to, move after that. And for me, I put him at 3 in that category, and so that's why I have him slotted at that spot for me.
Okay, that's fair. Well, for me, number 2 is the exact same guy, Justin Fields. So the things that I like about him is obviously he's got an extremely strong arm. He's very athletic, 4.4 40, and that was with a stumble. So who knows? He could be a 4.3 guy.
Yeah.
But I also think that, again, there's a stigma that comes with black quarterbacks, and a lot of people who don't actually watch him think that, oh, he's just another Kaepernick. He's going to run around, and I hear that crazy stuff all the time. He actually sits in the pocket more often than not. Now, he will take off on you from time to time, but he does like to sit in the pocket and look downfield and at least try to get a pass off before he's even thinking about moving. So I respect that about his game. But you're right, he holds the ball too long. And I know that there's a lot of excuses from the Fields mob about it. And one of them is, well, he's got a lot of choice or option routes, whatever you want to call it. Okay, that's great. But really, those routes are one on the field at a time, and it's not every single play. So that can't be the excuse as to why he holds it the 4th longest time in the nation at 3.11 seconds. And then when he's blitzed, that hang time or that hold time actually goes up. And when you compare him as far as pressure time versus the other quarterbacks, 2.6 seconds is right in line with the Jones and the Wilson and the Lawrences. And those guys get sacked half the amount of time that Fields does. There is, regardless of what the reason is, maybe it is the offense. If that's what you want to say it is, great. But there is certainly a processing time issue that I see, and it shows up on film time and time and time again. And, the early argument against him was he's a one-read quarterback. That simply is not true. The PFF grade came out and said that he is the best at getting to a second read out of any of these quarterbacks. He threw to a second read more than any quarterback. That's great, but that's an empty stat to me. Yes, it shows he gets through his reads, but when you hold the ball as long as he does, which is the 4th most time in the nation at 3.11 seconds, yeah, he should be able to get to a second read pretty often. So it's kind of like these two numbers are fighting against each other. And the number that I hold credence in is that hold ball time. And a lot of his reads, and it comes straight from Shane Day's mouth, are high-low reads. They're not a lot of left to right reads. So it's not like he's diagnosing going right to left or left to right like you're going to a lot in the NFL. It's a lot of high-low reads. And then that hold ball time really worries the heck out of me, because it's the same problem that Jimmy Garoppolo has. And I've said it before, but Jimmy Garoppolo has about 2.4 seconds on average to throw. In 2019, he took 36 sacks. And when I look at somebody like Ben Roethlisberger, who only had 2.1 seconds and took 17 sacks, that tells me that Jimmy has a processing issue. And we cannot have, in my opinion, a guy come in and be a better athletic Jimmy G, because that processing thing is going to drive Shanahan absolutely bonkers. It has to get fixed. And I'm not saying that it can't, but I'm not banking on it getting fixed personally.
Yeah, and I think that processing thing that comes out, and for whatever reason, people take that as some kind of a knock on the guy's intelligence. That's
Right.
and you've seen that come back so many times, and that's really not what it's about. It's
No.
because you can have a guy that's really smart and he just doesn't see the field, right? Or he just doesn't recognize things quick enough, or have the ability to, when he sees it, get the ball out of his hand. So, like case in point, I've heard a lot of talk, about Justin Fields and his performance. Obviously his performance in 2020 against Clemson was tremendous. But I've even had people tell me to go back and watch his game from 2019 against Clemson. So I took the time today to do that, and I saw a guy who they were only up in that game early in the game because they had a running back that was busting off a couple big runs.
Right.
I saw a guy who had a touchdown pass that was wide open, and it took almost 4 yards of that receiver running open before the ball started to get delivered. So by the time the ball comes out, it's in the back of the end zone, and the defense is able to react and knock the ball away from the receiver.
Yep.
That's for me, that's the slow processing. It's the time that it takes between the time that the ball needs to come out and it's actually coming out of his hand. And he's, I would say, of the three outside of Wilson, he's towards the bottom of that list.
Yep.
He doesn't have the ability to. I just don't think he sees the field clearly all the time.
And I will say this: the epilepsy thing is a deal. That's an issue for me. I know that the doctor said that it runs in his family and he'll grow out of it. Listen, I'm not a neurological scientist or doctor or anything like that, but you're telling me that somebody has seizure issues and they're going to be getting hit in the head. That worries me for a long-term health thing. His family may have gotten over it and grown out of it, but they're not taking repeated blows to the head like he's going to in the NFL. So he may be just fine, but that absolutely gives me some pause.
Yeah, it's not something that I really put a whole lot of, emphasis in. I try to just keep it to the field stuff, but yeah, it would
for sure.
Especially with the issues the 49ers have had, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to the injury issues of Wilson, or like if we go back into DBs later on, the DB out of Virginia Tech with the back issue, who's one of the, people say he's one of the best DBs in the class, cornerbacks, but the 49ers had enough trouble with guys getting injured. They don't need to be taking risks on guys. So who knows? Maybe that'll be a part of the reason.
Well, that's just it, right? Like for me, Fields hasn't moved, and I'm not going to move him off that spot because of this. But if you're back and forth and you're like, "Oh, I'm cool with Fields" or "I'm cool with Lance," to me, like that's enough to move the needle if towards Lance's way. If you're on the fence, I'm personally not on the fence. I've never been on the fence, but I think that it could in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, I hear you. So we're on number 2, right? So for my guy at number 2, I've got Trey Lance, and that's a huge change from our first discussion. In our first discussion, I remember saying that I thought that Lance was one of the biggest possibilities to bust was him and Wilson. If you remember correctly.
Yep.
The more that I watched of Lance, the more that I realized I was way off. And part of, I think, the reason I was way off was some of the games I'd watched earlier in the season. When I made that initial assumption. One of them was a game where it was the championship game in 2019, and I didn't realize it was like 45-degree weather that day.
Yeah.
So, so that's going to affect some of his deep ball accuracy, right, and stuff like that.
For sure.
But the more that I watched Lance, the more I realized that he's a guy that's doing it across the field. His reads are a little bit more left to right. You can see him go 1, 2, 3, 4 at times, or even go 1, 2, 3, 4 and then run.
Yeah.
He makes some really nice runs and things like that, but it's always late in the snap, unless he's got pressure and he's forced to move. He definitely is a guy that doesn't want to move. He doesn't, but he brings that dimension to the game where if they, with the bootlegs and things like that, he can, cause some issues with the defense, with the secondary, with having to try to move with that. So I really like what he brings. I like his size and the toughness that he brings in the pocket. I just, Justin Fields has that as well, but I just think Lance holds in better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, so my number one guy is exactly that. You went three. Your number three guy was my number two guy, and so forth and so on. Yeah, Lance to me is it. I mean, before I really started watching any film on him, and then watching your breakdowns and whatnot, I always knew he was talented. But I said it early on, and this could still be a possibility. But I said this was when we were at 12, so it was a while ago. I said, if we take Lance, he could be the biggest disaster. And at that time, I really thought that, just because he'd only had the 1 year of experience and he played at a smaller school. He hasn't played since really he was 19 years old. And once I started watching film on him, I started to fall in love with his game. And then we had Coach McAvoy on, and everything that I thought I was seeing in his game just came full circle when McAvoy pounded all that home for me and made me realize that what I was seeing was absolutely right. All the thoughts that I had of what he should be working on during this offseason and getting that one-on-one training is exactly what he was working on. And so all those little questions that I had about him completely got laid to rest. Is he a perfect prospect? Absolutely not. But I would liken it to this. If you are starting a new job, and I think a lot of people in the chat can probably relate to this. I'll just use a sales job, for example. You may be a great salesman. You may have great sales skills. However, when you start a new job, there are things that you've got to learn, such as maybe a new system, or maybe how to file paperwork differently, or just certain little processes that you're not used to doing. And so even though you're an A1 salesman, your processing and your thought and your day-to-day motion gets slowed down a little bit. And it takes you a few months to kind of get your swagger back because you're learning these other things. And when I look at Trey Lance, he's got all of the system issues down, right? He can read an NFL defense. And the reason that I know that is because he came up to the line, he called everything out as far as protections. He called audibles, and he even called long drawn out plays. And then to hear that his freshman year, before he even took a snap, his friend called him and asked him what he was doing. And he said, well, I'm breaking down NFL film. And his friend goes, why are you breaking down NFL film? Because I'm going to need to know how to read NFL defenses one day. And I want to figure this out now. Okay, I'm sold. You've got all those things in line. So when you go to the next level, you're not going to have to think about playing. You're just going to be able to play, which is fantastic. Now, he has some mechanical issues, and Coach McAvoy has assured us that those things have been fixed. I still see one, and I wish I could talk to Coach today to figure out what the issue is, but his left shoulder does get out in front of him a little bit. So when he's throwing right, he'll miss high quite a bit. And it even showed up during his first pro day. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see a second pro day, but I would imagine that it could still be an issue there. That's the only thing that he needs to clean up. As far as his eyes following his feet, that's been cleaned up from what I understand. As far as his head going up and down, like you saw on film, that has been worked on and cleaned up from what we understand. So really, he's got the one mechanical issue that was, in my opinion, probably the least worrisome out of the three. And so I'm completely sold. He's got the NFL size. He's got the speed. He's got the intelligence. And then the last thing that really sells me on him is what he does in his off time and visiting those children's hospitals. I know it may not seem like a big deal to you, but I bet you that the Houston Texans are looking at their situation with Deshaun Watson and wish that they had a character just like Trey Lance's to know that they are going to be secure. They can give him the bag and not have to worry about the face of their franchise doing something crazy and possibly ruining not only his own legacy, but ruining anything that you've got going with the franchise. And I'm not saying that Watson is guilty. I have no idea, but I do not worry that Lance is going to be put into one of those situations. So for me, that's why I have him number one.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, even if if the guy out in Houston, if he's not guilty, it's still a huge distraction that's hanging over the
Yep.
franchise this whole time. So I hear you on that. For me, at number one, I've got Mac Jones, and I've had Mac Jones all along at number one. There hasn't really been anything that's moved me off of that. The reason for me having Jones at one, I'll start off by saying that I think he's the best in the pocket. He has the best anticipation. I think his movement skills are severely underrated. I think if he just kept his uniform on after the national championship game, like the kid at LSU had done the year before when he had his cigar in his mouth, I think he would have been okay. But having that shirt off, showing his blubber, is made people think a whole lot different about it for whatever reason. So that's the starting point. And then I hear what you're saying on Trey Lance. What I'd say for anybody that's on the show tonight, go ahead and hit up my Twitter when we get off of here, and take a look at the article that I just tweeted out a little bit ago on Mac Jones. A lot of good information there from Steve Sarkisian. Really goes through kind of when he became a believer in Mac Jones. Jones wasn't the high when Jones and Tua ended up at Alabama the same year. Tua was a 5-star prospect. Jones was kind of a 3-star guy, so he was never expected to. He wasn't the guy, right? He wasn't expected to be the guy either. He's just a guy that worked his butt off. Got it. I think he was the MVP of their spring game in 2018. So he got a lot of really good reps against a really good defense, to the point that when he became the guy in 2019, when Tua went down, he was able to step into that role and played really well. I watched a lot of film on him early on, and I didn't when I first started watching Mac Jones. I was pretty much like everybody else. I think I'm just this guy's from Alabama. He's got it easy. He's not really having to do a whole lot of work. And when I watched his first couple of games, I was like, oh, he's actually not too bad. And so I was like, well, I want to go see what he did last year and see what he looks like compared to Tua. So I watched his game. The next game I turned on was 2019 versus Auburn, and holy smokes! I mean, and Sarkisian in the article, he references that as the game where he saw the turning point as well. Mm-hmm. Because in that game, Auburn's defense had some really good pass rushers and stuff, and he's getting knocked around, and he had a heck of a game. Really did a good job throwing it. He had 2 really bad interceptions that got returned for touchdowns. Both times he ended up coming back the next drive to lead them for touchdown passes, for touchdowns, throwing touchdown passes on each possession to get those back. And then at the end of the game, they were down, and he drove them down the field and put them in field goal position to tie the game, and they ultimately missed it. So that was a big turning point for me with my film study on him and what I thought of him as a quarterback. And then on top of that, he was really the guy. Think back to 2011 with the 49ers, and remember Alex Smith. So when Jim Harbaugh took over in 2011, they had a deal there where, remember, they weren't able to come into practice during the offseason because they were locked out.
Right.
So what Alex Smith did was Alex Smith got all the guys together, and they all went to San Jose State and had camp amongst themselves. And Smith ran them through all the drills and kind of got everybody ready. Yeah, well, that's really what happened at Alabama this year with Mac Jones. The whole COVID thing shut down what the coaches could do with the players. So he got everybody together, and he ran everybody through practices. And when Sarkisian asked them what they were doing, he started going through the list. It wasn't just throwing the ball around. They were actually running plays, working on checks, working on everything. And then the last piece too, you mentioned Lance, and that was one of the things that I really liked and changed me on Lance too, was the amount of processing he's doing to the line of scrimmage. Mm-hmm. Mac Jones doesn't have the protections at the line of scrimmage. That's coming from the sidelines at Alabama. Yeah, but he is making checks at the line of scrimmage. It's very subtle. It's pretty much all hands. A lot of it is hand stuff. I started noticing this as I got towards the end of my breakdowns with him, because you'll see him at times. He'll like rub one leg. Yeah,
it's like baseball symbols, like he's a third base coach.
Yeah, he's like rubbing his left leg, mm-hmm. Or another time he's rubbing both of them, or like in the one example that was brought up in the article, they didn't show it in the article, but there was somebody had tweeted it out, had the picture out there, and you can see him turn to the 3 receiver side, and you can see him make some signals with his mm-hmm. hands.
Yeah.
he's making the check at that point and then throw the touchdown pass. It's just the processing, and I think he's a better athlete than people give him credit for.
For sure.
His arm isn't the strongest. He definitely doesn't have high level arm talent, but I think he has the ability to hit everything in the playbook for the 49ers. He's going to max out at about 50 yards max. He's not going to be able to go any further than that. But there's really not too many times where you're going to be asked to throw the ball past that point anyway, because you don't get the time to sit there and do that. So, that's my long spiel on
that's totally fair, and you're right. As far as the deep throws in the NFL, I've looked at this, and this is 50 air yards or more. Who leads the league? And regardless of who leads the league, usually there's about 6 of those completed this season. So that's such a minute part of your game. It's really that's not an issue for me at all. His arm strength's not an issue. The one thing that I'll say is we saw Tua look good in that offense. And we talk about talent around him, right? But I just get a little worried when the guy before him looked good. And quite frankly, who's the guy that's there now? Bryce Young, is that his name? Right?
I think that's going to be the guy who will be
taken. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you saw the couple plays where he was able to come in, but he was throwing darts immediately, throwing touchdown passes, deep sideline touchdown passes. And then their spring practice, he looked phenomenal. It's like, okay, well, at what point is Mac Jones really so much better than the guy that went before him and the guy that went after him? I'm not sold on that. And I guess that's another worry for me is that's another reason to give me a little bit of pause. So
yeah, I'll give you a couple of answers on that one. First of them, and like Fog City Niner, he kind of agrees with you. Mac was passing he says he was passing to 4 first-round picks with an A+ O-line.
Yeah, again, the talent around you is irrelevant to me.
You've got to take that out, because you got to remember in 2020, that's when he was the starter for the full year. Mm-hmm. They had 2 first-round picks. They had as far as wide receivers, they had
they had Waddle and Smith.
Waddle and Smith, thank you. Well, Waddle only played 5 games out of the 12.
Yep.
And in the 7 games that he didn't play, Mac Jones didn't slow down.
Right.
He kept going. Yep. And so, from that standpoint, you got to, that's part of it for sure. Right. Mm-hmm. I can't find that one to get it off of the screen, but
just click on another one and then click off of it. There you go.
There we go. So that's part of it. There definitely was the talent there. But he made those guys better. I think when you talk about the A+ O-line, that O-line was good. But when you really watch them play, there are a number of times when he's making them look better because the ball comes out of his hands so quick. And
Leatherwood's going to be a 2nd-round pick, and quite frankly, that's his issue. He gets beat by speed rushers. That's it. That was his left tackle. So that he's actually a really good run blocker, but he's got question marks when it comes to the pass blocking. So I don't think his offensive line was good. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be guys that are drafted, but I don't think it was elite in pass protection.
No, and that showed up at the Senior Bowl in the practices that I saw when on the TV. I wasn't there, obviously, but watching him as much of it as I could on TV, he seemed to struggle in pass protection. He's a good run blocker, but he struggles in pass protection. And then to get back to your point though about the when Bryce Young came in and how good he looked. I know he's not a guy that that's being talked about as a top 3 pick in the draft, but if you go back and watch what happened when they took Najee Harris out of the game, and they put number 4 in the game, I don't know who that player is, but there wasn't a whole lot of slowdown in the running game when they brought him in either. Yeah. So I think it's just a matter of there's a lot of talent around them, but they're really good across the board with everybody. Yeah. The toughest game that they played all year was really against Florida. I think Florida played them the best out of anybody in 2020. They really had a good scheme for Alabama in that game, and they were really able to get after them. They had them moving around, and that was I remember on that breakdown, and there were a number of folks that said that was one of his rougher games, and I think there was a lot of truth to that because he's having to move around off of a spot a lot more than normal. But he still was pretty darn efficient.
Raymond Martinez has a really, really good comment here. It says, so it sounds like as if you guys were Kyle and John. Lance would be the pick for John and Mac is the pick for Kyle. I wonder if they are okay with either of those 2 guys. Well, I would say this. If their quarterback order is exactly what our order is, then I would assume that the pick would be Lance, because for me, I've got Lance 1 and Mac Jones 4, and he's got Lance 2. And yes, he has Mac Jones at 1, but I mean, the tiebreaker is like, listen, I think your guy's number 4. So let's just meet in the middle and go with Lance.
Yeah.
But listen, if you're Kyle Shanahan and you're the one that likes him, then you're probably going to get your way. So I'm way off my rocker anyways. So.
I mean, really, who knows, right? I mean, I know that I got my guys that I like, and you have yours, and
you know what I'm going to say. You know what I'm going to say about this, Jack, is I'm definitely not on the Fields train as heavy as some of these guys, and so I get killed when I say Lance or whatever. But you are out on an island with Mac Jones. There's about you. And when I watch, when I'm on Grant's show or I'm going through the chat there's like 2 other guys that are consistently on the Mac Jones train. So the fact that you have stayed steadfast in that gives me a little bit of confidence. Maybe there's some things that I'm not seeing. I don't know. Maybe I just can't get out of my own way when it comes to seeing him, because I really respect your opinion. You watch a lot of film. And so I'm not going as far as to say that I'll be okay if they pick Mac, but it's something that I might be able to get over. All right. So I'll say that, because before I was definitely going to be packing the bags of Shanahan myself, but I might just take a week away, not do any shows, calm down, and then come back a renewed man because of what you've said about him. So
yeah, I know that it's funny. You've got so many people saying so much stuff about this whole thing, and for folks like us, it can't be any better. I'm not going to get upset with whoever they pick. I have the guys who I think they should, and the guys who they shouldn't. But at the end of the day, they're going to pick somebody, whether we like them or not, and we're going to get to talk and write about them and break them down and watch it from there.
For sure.
Yeah, Josh asked the question here real quick. Anybody know if North Dakota State has any other players being drafted?
Yeah,
there is. There's I think it's their left tackle. He's a guy that's been working with Joe Staley in the run up to the draft. So
as far as guys that are going to be drafted, I think as I've gone through the list, I really think it's only his left tackle that's probably going to get drafted as far as the offensive side of the ball. So but again, coming from an FCS school, 2 players get taken, and one of them being Lance. That's pretty dang good, because not a lot of players come from FCS. So
yeah, and I think he got held back a little bit at times by his receivers as well. Not
on
some
for sure,
where they're not able to finish their route, or they're trying to run a deep route, and you can see their feet stop before they get to the ball and all kinds of things.
So. Well, that's the other thing too. So I know that was it Akasha, I think is his name. He's pretty big in the Twitter community for the 49ers, got a big following. And I know that him and a couple other guys will post. I think it's him that said that Lance should have had as many as 6 picks in his first 4 games or something like that. Well, that's all well and dandy. But to your point, Jack, a lot of that is on the receivers. If he comes up to the line and he calls a certain play and he's expecting a receiver to be at a certain point, and that receiver doesn't do what he's supposed to do, a pick can be made. But picks a lot of times are on receivers. They're not on quarterbacks. So I don't put a lot of stock in that. And most of the quote unquote picks that I saw that would have been against Lance, quite frankly, I think are either a lazy route from a receiver or the wrong route from a receiver, because where he's throwing the ball versus where that receiver is at were 2 completely different areas sometimes.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that about the receiver causing an incompletion, or maybe even a ball that looks like it could be intercepted. But heck, those guys are super big Justin Fields guys, right?
Yep.
So if you want to reference the Clemson, like I just mentioned earlier today, the Clemson game from 2019 and in the semifinal game that they lost, he threw 2 interceptions in that game.
Yep.
And he threw at least 2 other passes that should have been intercepted, one on the sidelines and another one that was more in the middle of the field. So, if you want to start playing that game, we can go through all these guys and find plays like that across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can do that with everybody. I mean, I know a lot of people said that with Jimmy. They said, well, he had rookie receivers. And so even though he had 20 turnovers to 27 touchdowns or whatever it ended up being, how many of those were on the receiver? And I'm like, that's true. But I can also count on probably 8 to 10 other times that Jimmy should have just thrown picks that were flat out dropped, including that Minnesota playoff game. And by the way, if those picks had gone through, there's a good chance that we don't beat Minnesota. So,
yeah, I hear you. I agree. And there's District 13. He agrees with me. He's on all my phone breakdowns too. He gets on there and he's chopping it up with me. He says his arm's enough. Maybe he's, I think I've got him convinced.
He's right though, because Watson, if you go look at ball velocity, he's got one of the weaker arms in the NFL when it comes to overall velocity, which is kind of surprising. I think that most people think that Watson has a very strong arm, and it's actually not the case.
Yeah, I hear you. I agree with you. Raymond says, and this kind of gets us maybe into another kind of off the quarterback topic, but I think I'm going to bring it back to it right now.
Yeah.
He says, question, who's the second round pick? I love Jesse's idea of trading Jimmy and the second for New England's first. I just don't think New England is as interested. So, that's the pick that everybody's got out there, right? So, everybody's so hyper focused on the quarterbacks, but if you want to really look at who the best football player is for them to take at number 3 and the guy that's going to fill their, a bunch of different needs for him, it's really going Kyle Pitts at number 3.
Yeah.
And then you trade Garoppolo and that second round pick. If you need to throw in another, even next year's second round pick to get back into the top 12 or 15, if Mac Jones was to slide that far, you pick him up there. If you could bring in Pitts and Jones, holy moly, that's a heck of a
draft. You're absolutely right. And I'm not the biggest on Mac Jones, but there's a big difference in taking him at 12 and versus taking him at 3, or taking him at 15 and taking him at 3. So yeah, for me, I wouldn't hate that by any means. I also think that I think that's a great idea. I also think taking whoever we take at 3, regardless of what quarterback that is. And for me, if we could make that trade that Raymond just said, my overall trade was, if we get to 15, then we can take JC Horn, who has been my biggest draft crush this whole time. So if we could do that, I would be smitten. That might even be enough if we take Mac Jones to get me over it in 2 days instead of a week.
No, I mean, that's true. That's even better. I think that might even be better than one that I was just coming up with. And the reason I say that is because I really, I know we had talked about we were going to try to get into the second and third rounds of the draft as well. We really got stuck on the quarterbacks, but my second round guy I think it's going to be a cornerback. I think they've got to get a corner either round 2 or 3, but definitely in 2. And so if you're able to trade back into the top 15 or top 20, whatever it is, if Horton is there and take JC Horn, that's a heck of a move.
Yeah. That would be it. For me, I think the other thing that we could do, and I agree with you, I think that getting a corner in round 2, whatever our second pick is, it has to be a corner, in my opinion. That area of need is the most glaring weakness on our team. And if Ferret goes down, we are absolutely screwed. Grant pointed that out, and it's so darn true. Mm-hmm. But I will say this, I think that there are some really good corners that we could actually recoup some of these picks that we've given up, quite frankly, over the next couple of years, and possibly pull out like maybe another third rounder next year or a third rounder this year by moving back into the second round. And there are some names like Aaron Robinson and Paulson Edebo that I wouldn't mind getting, that we could get late round 2 for sure, and possibly early round 3. So if you could trade back and get a talent like that still, I would be extremely happy with that.
Yeah, the corners I like Robinson. Robinson would be a guy to me. He can play outside, but I think he'd be a guy
better nickel.
Yeah, if they brought him in, he's a guy that's going to be able to replace K1 in 2022. He'll be able to play inside and outside, but he's more of a nickel kind of a guy.
Yeah.
I really like Eric Stokes out of Georgia.
Yeah.
In the second round.
Super fast.
Yeah. And or him or Greg Newsome out of Northwestern. Neither of those two guys.
Listen, if Newsome falls to 2 and we have a chance to get him, you pull the trigger immediately. I've heard that Newsome may even slip back into the first round, that his stock is going up so high. So that if we could get him at 43, I would absolutely love Newsome. I had him number 3 out of all my corners. I had him even above Surtain, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wasn't too high on Surtain. I think, I know I might have been at the beginning, but when I started watching the film, and I saw how much he struggled with Pitts, for example.
Yeah.
He started to slide down for me a little bit because
Yeah.
Pitts is I know he's a tight end, but he's fast like these NFL wide receivers.
For sure.
Yeah, so I moved him off. So that's what I've got in round 2. I'm going corner, and then for me, round 3, I'm looking. We've got to go back to round 3. I think the 49ers got to go to wide receiver at that point.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because they've lost. They really don't have anything behind Deebo Samuel, who hasn't been able to stay healthy, and Brandon Ayuk. After that, it's pretty much journeyman. Richie James Jr. has never shown the ability to stay on the good side of Kyle Shanahan and be used on a regular basis. So at 3, I'm not sure who's going to be there. Amari Rodgers from Clemson is a guy that I really liked when I watched him on film. He reminds me of Deebo Samuel. He looks like that's who he looks like. Yeah, with the way that the style that he plays with.
Yeah, for sure. And we that we love those guys that are kind of Swiss Army knives. I don't have a problem with going receiver at 3 if this roster. I mean, we can only go based off of how the roster is. So receiver in the 3rd round, I have no issue with that. In a dream world for me, I would say let's go sign Golden Tate and let him fill that slot role and draft an interior offensive lineman in round 3. Somebody that can play multiple positions just in case, let's say, Matt gets injured. Also, he's 36 years old. How long are we really going to have him? We've had kind of a revolving door at right guard, and there are some guys that can play right guard. But I think the more competition and the more the better backup plan that we have there in any of those interior offensive line spots, I think that's always a good thing. So that would be my ideal situation. But as the roster is currently constructed, I agree. I think receiver in the 3rd round, I wouldn't have an issue with that at all.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying on that 3rd round. They definitely there needs to be a progression plan set up for the center position, right?
Yeah.
Because Max usually been able to stay healthy, and he's been fairly decent, but they need to get a guy in there that can start to learn that now. So that might be a spot where, hey, if the one kid from Wisconsin, Whitewater Menieres, I think his name was, who had a heck of a Senior Bowl. Yeah. If he falls into the 3rd round and he's kind of there towards the end of it, maybe they can pick him up at that spot.
Well, and usually in college, quite frankly, centers a lot of times played a lot of guard as well. So, if you could put him at right guard to start or left guard to start and then kick him into center once Mac goes out or Mac retires, that would be ideal. Like if we're taking somebody in the 3rd round, I would want them to play now, ideally, if possible, at least compete to play now. And then from there, kick them into center if that's something that you want to do later. So,
yeah. Another guy to keep an eye on in this draft at center is going to be, that I think we'll see if they take him, is Drew Dahlman. He's out of Stanford. His dad his dad was a center for the 49ers in the 90s, 90s, early 2000s.
Sure was.
And Drew's when you watch him play, he sure does really well. He does a really good job of setting that front, and he's not the biggest guy, but he does a good job in both run and pass blocking. He anchors really well. And I saw something on Twitter earlier this week about him, and I think he was something that ranked him like the 4th best or something like that, for some model of the stats that they do.
By the way, he's from Stanford. We take one every year, so that fits. Didn't his dad, wasn't he the one that wore the double shell helmet? He had the second. I remember we had an offensive lineman in the 90s, and I want to say it was Dahlman. He had the second shell. I'm sure somebody in the chat remembers or can go look it up, but I swear he had the second shell.
Steve Wallace had that.
Was it Wallace that had it?
Yeah, Steve Wallace had it.
Okay, maybe it was Wallace.
Yeah, that was back when you had the guy from the Bills was the first one that had it, and then Steve Wallace had it. I remember we used to laugh at that because it made him look like the great Kazoo from the Flintstones.
For
right?
sure,
the big head.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah,
I don't know why I thought it was Dahlman, but I knew that there was an offensive lineman in the 90s that had it.
Well, it was for sure. I know for sure that Wallace had it, and who knows, maybe Chris Dahlman had one towards the end of his career.
Maybe.
Point. Yeah. So that's kind of where I am right now. Okay. And it takes us through the first couple of days, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the most important. If you, and somebody actually shouted it out, Josh Mangold says, I'm interested in the defensive draft by LSS tonight. Yeah. So right after this is what we did. So on Monday, me and the crew did like I said, a full offensive draft where we draft 11 players that are all on the offensive side of the ball. We basically make a whole starting unit. And the reason that we did that is because we were able to go through and having 2 picks in the 4th through the 7th rounds, we were able to figure out a lot of these guys that you're probably not going to hear of before draft night. And if they end up on the 49ers or any team, maybe that you follow, what have you, it's kind of nice to know that you've heard these names and kind of know their skill set. And we're doing the same thing for the defensive side. So if there's any like late round sleepers that you possibly like or haven't heard of that you kind of want to hear about, check us out. We're starting in about 10 minutes. So
perfect. Yeah, definitely got to check it out. Make sure everybody jumps over there as well after this.
For sure. And if you're not, listen, if you're not subscribed to this channel, what are you doing? Subscribe. I'm telling you, I promise you, Jackhammer is the smartest guy that you will watch. He knows his ish more than anybody that I follow. He breaks down film. If there's anybody that you need to follow to really understand how good certain players are, or if you want to win an argument with your buddy over a certain quarterback or a certain player that you think we should be taking, watch his film breakdowns. He is the smartest guy around. Subscribe. Show this man some love. It's a shame that he's only at 238 subscribers or whatever. Get this man over 300 tonight, please.
Yeah, thanks for that shout out, and that'd be great to get the, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you know when I go on.
Yes.
I know that I saw where you're gonna be on with Eric Crocker tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yeah. He's a cool guy. We've had some back and forth, and I know he's super busy, so hopefully we can make it happen. But I think I'm going to be gone with Eric tomorrow. So
yeah, he's a guy that's really good too. And I don't really follow a whole lot of I don't really follow a lot of the guys. They just kind of pop up on my thing. A lot of it is the guys that break down film. Part of the reason I don't follow them, it's not because I don't like them or I don't like their opinions. It's like I try to keep my own opinions.
You want your own opinion, yeah.
Yeah, but there's been a couple of times where he and I have communicated on Twitter, after a post of mine or his or whatever, and we're always pretty much on the right track. He definitely knows things at a higher level than I do with certain things because he played in the NFL at one point.
For
so
sure.
If you want to talk defense, you go to talk to Eric Crocker because he's going to say that, but he knows his stuff on offense too. So I enjoy talking with him as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So make sure subscribe to my channel, jump on with Jesse's channel here where he's going to be on in about less than 10 minutes now, and support everybody that you can and get a ton of great content on 49ers football.
Absolutely. Jack, listen, one more week. I can't wait. I don't know what you're doing for a draft thing. I know that we talked a little bit. If for some reason you don't go live, I would like for you to tap in and come on my channel as soon as that pick's made and just kind of give me an instant reaction. I think that would be super cool. But if not, then I can't wait till the following week to really talk about what happened in this draft and fully break it down, because the cool thing about it is that we will have had a week's time since the draft, which means I already know you're going to be watching a lot of film on this channel of every single guy that we drafted. And so it'll be nice to have that educated opinion going into it. And we can talk about some of the talent that we've gotten in this draft. So I'm looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Jack, have a good night.
All right. Well, you too. Thanks everybody for joining.